Okay, so I want to start, got general broad questions, but I want to start with something specific and maybe juicy for Kathleen. I know it's not necessarily exactly your purview, but of course HBO has one of its flagship shows with an expiration date coming.
Yes.
And last I heard there were between 4 and 22 Game of Thrones spin-offs, prequels, etc., in development, contemplation. As you look at what that brand has done for HBO, what is the importance of kind of continuing it, and what are the sort of secrets in HBO's mind in terms of what is going to actually count as a viable Game of Thrones branded sequel?
That's kind of a hard question, actually. I mean, I guess the answer is, this is the worst answer ever, is that I don't think we know. I mean, I think we have hope that these spin-offs will become, I mean, we didn't know Game of Thrones was going to become Game of Thrones. You sort of can't guess at something like that. It was a really strong script. Obviously Dan and David are incredibly talented, and there's a property, which, to our point, there was, a book, many books behind it, and so you trust that there's enough material for ongoing series, blah, blah, blah. With the spin-offs, I think we hope that, we don't know. They're truly, they're writing the scripts and we'll see. If it's on the page and it feels like it matches, sort of the level of fandom and all of that stuff, then we'll move forward. But it's very much anyone's guess right now as to what will come out of this process.
But is it a different pressure since this is something that HBO hasn't really done before?
Of course. My boss, Casey, who's awesome, when he got the job, he was like, I'm the guy who has to find the next Game of Thrones. It's a really big, I'm like, you're going to lose your hair and go gray. It's going to be really stressful, but we'll figure it out. And maybe it's not, maybe the answer is to not continue it, but we'll see. We're going to let everybody write the scripts and then take it from there.
I think there will be an uproar somewhere if the answer is not to continue it.
I think you're probably right. It has a lot of people are hopeful, but because of that, there's a huge pressure, of course. Sorry,
now this is going to be sort of
what am I saying? I can't say anything that's going to be in the press. Be careful.
This is general, and it's going to be for anyone who sort of wants to jump in. I tend to do my homework when I'm reviewing something, and that means that I'm the nerd who reads the book something's based on, who makes sure that if it's based on a TV series, I've seen all of it. It's a lot of homework, and I find that now 2/3 of the shows I'm reviewing are based on something else. I have to do homework in order to understand what they are. And I guess I'm wondering if it feels like this is proliferating more to you guys, and if it's as simple as, in a world with so much damn TV, this is a way of cutting through the clutter, is to give people a name they know, or if you guys think there's something else underneath it. It's a big question. Anyone who's got an answer, though.
I think you said it is, call it what you will, cutting through the clutter. I think to me, it's built-in marketing. I think it's a risk business that we're in, where most of the stuff we develop just fails. But I think that, you have to get used to that. So when you have a leg up, meaning you have a great book, or you have a great comic book, or you have a great pre-existing property, for whether it be a movie or an old TV show, it eliminates a little of that risk, because you think that there's built-in at least promotional opportunity, there's brand awareness. So as much as it's a risk business, I think most networks, because there's so much money involved, are a little risk averse. And this helps with that a little bit. And I think the more you can package it up. It's an insurance
policy.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't always work, as we all know. We've seen plenty of them fall flat. But going in, it does give you a little bit of confidence. And I think it also helps you attract great talent. If you have a really solid property, you can get great actors, directors, writers. So I think, it's clutter, whatever you will. I think it does give you a little bit of insurance and just balance on the whole business.
And I do think, just to Grant's point, in a world where there's also competitiveness for the writers and the directors and the actors, having something that, whether or not it has a cult following or not, that's an interesting property to attract the talent to work on it, is actually part of what's behind it for us, too, in terms of finding material and just buying properties. So we have something cool to offer writers who are looking for something to work on.
I was going to say, a lot of great prolific writers don't have ideas. So we find that a lot, where we want a kernel, a piece of IP, source material, a book with a roadmap, an article, whatever it is. I mean, more and more we're finding that we're bringing stuff to writers. I don't know what that says.
Well, I'm curious about that, the lack of good original ideas. What is the process wherein you're sitting and you're meeting with a writer and you go, okay, this person has a voice, they just apparently don't have a story to tell, so how can I match them to something that I already have? How does that work?
You're asking me.
Well, since you brought it up, you can start with it.
I mean, I would say if we have like a property, if we have a book, I guess we look for writers that sort of have the same sensibility, have the same voice, have worked in that specific genre, whether it's comedy or drama or, you know, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, and we figure out if, you know, they speak to the material, if they have a way in, if they have a point of view. I think more than anything, we want to make sure that these writers have like a very distinct vision and it's sustainable. So if a younger writer comes in and we think that they have a really good point of view about a piece of property, I think oftentimes we like to bring in a showrunner as well to be able to carry out that vision.
I think in our world, what I'm always following first is passion. So I won't necessarily be looking to do the initial pairing. I'll be looking to present a range of options to talent and see what they warm to. Because we have the DreamWorks library, the Universal library of titles, then plus we have the Classic Media library of hundreds of characters. So we'll cull the list, bring it to creatives, follow the passion first, and then go through the process of figuring out if their take is the right one. But we're looking to ignite passion.
Well, I'm curious about the culling of the list process, and this is for you, Peter, but also for Alex, because Amblin has its library as well. At any given moment, how actively are you considering digging into that library, and for how many different things at any given time?
I mean, our libraries are quite significant, so you have to be thoughtful. Like, we've gone into our library, and we have everything from Baby Huey, who you remember is a giant mentally challenged duck in a diaper, and we can't really figure out what to do with him as a character. But we've also got everything Jay Ward did. We've got, you know, Rocky and Bullwinkle and, you know, some of the most important animation characters of all time. So we're going to focus on the things that have had some longevity or things that we just look at and feel relevant to us for some reason. Like a good example was Rocky and Bullwinkle. I looked at that a few years ago, and I said, I don't know if this is relevant to kids today. It was born from like a Cold War ethos, and that's gone. Well, now we're going to develop that because that feels relevant all of a sudden. So it's timing and material and passion.
And we were just talking about that backstage. You know, we have extensive libraries to look at, but you know, there are iconic properties that you wouldn't want to reboot unless you had a reason for it. So a few years back, we rebooted Minority Report. The writer had a really great take how to make that viable as a network procedural, and we really loved it and it made sense. We're rebooting Animaniacs, which is from the Is this better? Oh, that is amplified. Oh, okay. We're rebooting Animaniacs, which is
I
from...
love Animaniacs so much.
Does anybody want to sing?
I still like the planets and all the capitals. I know all that
It's-
stuff because of Animaniacs.
I gotta say, like, and that's an existing IP that you would be surprised how many incoming calls it generates, because there are so many writers that are passionate, that grew up with it, that sing me the theme song in meetings.
Still do
and
Should we sing
we
it?
do it.
Please, somebody sing
sing
it,
it?
because
I'm not going to
promise
do it on
I
my
won't.
own.
But
This one doesn't work anyway, so perfect.
Oh, it
it's
works.
for
Go,
you.
go for it.
It's
Oh,
working
great.
now. So, you know, that one, another passion IP that we package is Amazing Stories. That's also something that, you know, a lot of people grew up with. It was a anthological kind of wish fulfillment, you know, Steven Spielberg's response to a Twilight Zone type anthology. And we felt like the market is incredibly ripe for that. I think looking at our back library, it's really about when there's a reason to do it, because there are so many to choose from. We don't look at it every day. We just kind of look at it when somebody comes in for a meeting and says, "Oh my gosh, have you ever thought about doing that?" And the passion gets us excited about it. So.
Well, you mentioned Minority Report, and one of the things that strikes me in the network development season is the number of things that are being remade at any given time where I look at the title and I go, wait, I don't understand what the value of just the title is. Because so Minority Report, when I think of it, I think of Spielberg, I think of Tom Cruise, and then there's the title. I'm curious whose job it is to figure out when an actual title has value and where the title value lies?
That's a really great question, and something that came through in the focus groups. You know, that title was an old enough title that it was not a significant value add to the launch campaign. But you know, Animaniacs and Amazing Stories are, and there's tremendous name value to that. I think it's, you know, a learning curve in gauging the market.
Well, like, Kathleen, if Westworld had been called Old Westland or something that wasn't a movie from 40 years ago, would it have had the same value?
That's a good question. I think, you know, obviously, because Westworld's so specific, it was a small following, but it definitely attracted a certain audience. But I think that's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it was significant enough. It wasn't just fans of the movie who came to watch the series, obviously. It's a big show for us. And so, and I think people watched it and then went, oh, it's a movie too? So it was, you know, there were enough new audience eyeballs on it that I think, it helped, but it's not crucial.
Now, Carolyn, you come at this from a different perspective because you work for E1, which is an internationally based company, and so you have sort of a sense of what the international marketplaces are for these. How much would you say that international is driving almost all of the sort of remake, reboot, adaptation mania? Are titles more important for an international marketplace?
Well, I think there's two questions there.
Probably 3 or 4, actually.
Great. So let's start with how is international driving? I think more than ever, because there's so many TV shows in the American marketplace in particular, international for places like Amazon, like Netflix, probably like HBO, not to speak for HBO, but they're driving, now being able to reach those customers, it's driving a lot of now what people I think are starting to commission. How do we get more eyeballs to our shows? It's not so much within America anymore. I think you have to look outside those borders, especially because, you know, for more advertiser-based players, you know, you're just not making your money off of your advertising. So how you have to own it, and then you have to be able to sell it. And so I think that is going to, which is kind of like the movie business in a way, you know, like it's going to follow a little bit of that movie business idea and trying to find talent and ideas that will be global. And although you can also have them be specific, that's not like necessarily mutually exclusive, but I do think it's going to start driving things in a different way. And vice versa. And things are going to start coming from international and coming into America. So it's going to go both ways. We're seeing a lot of that as well.
Well, how do you keep an eye on what titles have what value in what territory, and how you can, you know, leverage a title that might have huge value in Spain and has less value here, but still sell it to American audiences and American networks?
That is a good question. I think you can see, I mean, you don't really ever know until you put something out there 100%. You can do focused tests, you can try, you know, specific focus tests, but you never really know how something's going to pop until you put it out there. I mean, that's just part of the fun of this business. It's like, well, you know, hopefully, because you can't quantify it. So I think what you can see, and when you start kind of looking at metrics, is how things play in certain territories and try and find like that access point, that kind of like Venn diagram where you can kind of hit it. Because when you look at enough titles and you see how they work over several territories, you start to notice things like, Canal Plus and this, you know, and CTV in Canada, they have similar tastes and stuff between them do very well. You know, so you can start to see how different relationships between broadcasters start to work. And so I know it's not exactly getting to title, but I think through that, then you can start to find the title, because it's the title that's driving it. So you can start to see relationships and how different titles will be beneficial for those relationships.
And Grant, how is it different when sort of the brand or the title associated is the company brand? Right. I mean, it doesn't matter what you attach to Marvel's ... it becomes Marvel's.
No, it's exactly right. I think for me, and you know, I've been there 10 months now, helping them get into the comedy side of the TV business, and part of the appeal of jumping into that world is that you do have that giant red Marvel flag on everything that you take out to sell and everything you put up on screen. And it is sort of a built-in mark of quality, a built-in mark of something exciting is coming, something surprising is coming. I think it worked really well with their launch of Jessica Jones, and that was a character even I was ignorant. I didn't know who that was. They put the Marvel insignia in front of it, and you're automatically intrigued. You're like, this is just a regular, boring name, Jessica Jones, but you see the Marvel in front of it, and you're automatically pulled to check that out. I think Netflix helped with their ad campaign that was something like, soon everyone will know her name, which was admitting no one knows who this is, but trust us, oh, and here's the Marvel. So I think it helps whatever network you're going to, they say, hey, we'll slap that Marvel on there, we'll get it built in. We know we're going to get that core audience to at least watch the first couple episodes. That is really helpful when you're selling something, and not to mention when you're going out to package something. When you're going to find a writer, when you're going to find a director, anybody, any crew, you know, they're huge fans of this brand, of this company, because you've got fans of the comics, you've got fans of the movies now, and now, you know, in the last 5 years or so, fans of the TV. So it is just sort of a great backbone to have, really, of just a quality marker.
Well, for you, and this is also for Simran, because you guys are doing New Warriors together, why is that
And Cloak and Dagger.
And Cloak and Dagger, right. So why is that New Warriors? Why is that not the Squirrel Girl show?
It's a really good question. I think, you know, she's obviously one of the better known and favorite characters that will be in that show. It's based on, this particular concept of New Warriors is based on a series of comics that actually existed from about 10 years ago, written by a guy named Zeb Wells, that took these characters and put them in sort of a comedic, you know, sort of took a comedic tone as opposed to what they had been, you know, a little bit more serious. I think they actually were responsible for causing the Marvel Civil War. I don't know the whole story, but that seems legit and not funny. Not when you talk to real Marvel fans. But this case, it's pure comedy. She'll be at the forefront. You know, I think there's just so much to be had there. She's a great character. I have no doubt she could probably have carried her own show and carried her movie, but this will be something else for her, you know. It will show different sides to her. It'll show what she's missing, what she wants out of being a superhero. There's all sorts of angles you can hit, and it takes a little bit of pressure off her as well. If you just call it the Squirrel Girl show, she better be, you know, a really dynamic show. I think with superhero movies, it's tough when you have one character, any TV show for that matter, when you have just one character, that's a lot of pressure to carry a show. I think when you add an ensemble element to it, which a lot of these, you know, Marvel movies have done really well, Avengers, all these, even X-Men, it allows you to dole out that pressure a little bit on different characters. Not that that was the thought process behind this. I think there's just something really rich there in having her in a group to mind. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think we were just, Squirrel Girl clearly is an iconic character and my personal favorite, which is, you know, one of the big reasons we were excited about the property. But then as we explored the other characters, a lot of whom we weren't necessarily familiar with at the onset of the project, it's just exciting to have that ensemble vibe to the comedic show, because young ensembles are always lovely when you get them right, and it was just a really exciting way to twist that genre in a way that was unexpected for us. But Squirrel Girl was, of course, the biggest draw.
So, Peter, you guys have adapted a large number of, obviously, the most successful DreamWorks Animations movies into TV shows. What is the process when the movie is being made of, is there a simultaneous development going on? We think that this character could be a hook for a TV show. We think this idea is a hook for a TV show at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we have the right recipe for it. I mean, we are developing our TV shows way earlier in the life cycle of a film than anyone else in Hollywood. So at Disney, for instance, you notice with Disney and Pixar, there's a tendency, the movies come out, they see how they do, they decide on the sequel strategy, they give it some time, and then maybe TV can get access. In DreamWorks, it's been the opposite, and part of it was that, you know, we pitched this deal to Netflix in 2012 that they agreed to, which was crazy. It was over 1,000 episodes of television. It was 14 series. It expanded to 18 series. And a lot of those were based off titles that hadn't come out yet. So what we do is we look at each of the films as it's in process. In our world, luckily, there's almost always an angle to turn the film into a TV series. There have only been 1 or 2 films that didn't feel like they would really work as a kid's series. So what we do is we look at each one and decide whether we want to make it hew very closely to the original feature, meaning do we want that same CG look, that same vibe, this focus on the main characters? Do we want to focus on secondary characters, which we've done in a couple of series? Do we want to move it into 2D animation and make it much more comedic than the feature? So we develop almost every feature into a series. It's just a matter of the creative choices along the way.
And what is the role of the original movie creator then in the hypothetical TV projects? Or does it simply go off in its own direction because you're already working with kind of a committee approach?
It depends on the creators and what our initial thoughts are to do with the series and how it dovetails with them and their talent, and also what else they're busy with. So a lot of times the feature team is onto a sequel or onto something, and they don't really have time to heavily focus on the TV series. But there's some key pieces of talent that we always want, like Tom McGrath, who just directed Boss Baby, directed all the Madagascar films. He's unbelievable. So when we're developing a show off a Tom McGrath movie, we are trying desperately to claw any time we can get with him, to have him read scripts and look at material. We always engage with the feature producers, so we make sure that anything we're doing with the franchise on an ongoing basis doesn't step on the toes of sequel ideas. So we have a healthy, kind of pitch and catch back and forth of materials. On most of the movies, we have pretty heavy involvement from the feature teams.
Well, for the rest of you, what do you guys see as being the importance of having a creator involved? Is that an extra voice that you don't necessarily need or want in the room, or is it something where the risk of having a creator distance themselves from something based on their property is too great, and that's the danger?
I think if you have a strong POV from the writer and the TV writer, the one who's executing the actual TV show, it can be either which way. But I think if that is where the interpretation needs to primarily come from, often these shows should veer from where the source material has gone. And sometimes an original creator is precious about that, and sometimes they're very open to it. But if there is a strong voice from the showrunner and the person interpreting it, it can go either which way.
And as a fan, I would point to Jessica Jones. Like, I don't know the history of the original IP. I'm not a Jessica Jones aficionado, but I bought into it because I was like, oh, this is an interesting looking show, and I was obsessed, and I think it's such a unique point of view, and I don't know if going off of that original IP, you would have gotten as rich and as beautiful a vision. It was clearly a creative vision, custom made for the canvas of television.
But it can also go in the not to contradict you, but it can go. But it can go.
No,
in the
please,
other,
please do fight.
No,
I
do think it is unique to the passion of what,
each and every pieces. Because with Sharp Objects, which we're doing with you guys, I mean, Gillian is very much involved, and obviously she's the writer. Obviously with Marty Noxon, who is, the showrunner. But I think she's been really helpful in kind of taking the material and pushing it forward and coming up with what a second season could be, which would be very different from the book. So, exactly. You never know. You just never know. You kind of have to take it creator by creator and by each case.
And they don't always want to be involved. I mean, at least in my corner of the world, we've dealt with a number of authors who are really excited that we're doing a series based off their book or graphic novel or whatever, and they want the occasional touch base just so they're aware. But it's not what they do, and they're once we've introduced them to the talent that's going to execute, and they're excited and feel a creative synergy, they're very willing and happy to kind of step away and let it take its course.
Now, Carolyn, going back to Sharp Objects, that's a property that was packaged from the star Amy Adams to the director Jean-Marc Vallée to, as you say, Marty Noxon. What are the advantages of that packaging process and being able to go out to a network rather with the entire thing top to bottom? And then Kathleen, and Simran as well, what are the disadvantages from the network side of not having the control over those things?
Well, I think, when you're putting these things together, you're putting together what you think is like the ultimate version. So when you go to the marketplace, you are taking a risk because you put a lot of money in terms of a studio, a lot of time. But if you hit it, it's a great way to go straight to series and get there faster. So it's kind of like internal research and development. It's R&D. And you have to be careful how much you do it because it doesn't always work. But if you can hit that level of excellence, then you will be in a good position, I think.
I mean, I agree, and I'm sort of two minds about it because it's obviously worked very well for us. Sharp Objects, Big Little Lies, True Detective Season 1, these all came to us, and we definitely now are prepared for packages. Like you have to hear from agents, like, okay, or whomever, like something is coming in 3 weeks, and it's this big package, and it'll be a series order, and so those are, we're prepared for them and we're ready for them and we like them, but also, it's conflicting because we also have stuff internally that we're developing, and so you're like, okay, these people, this package comes in, it cuts the line, so it's both things. It's very exciting when something like that walks in the door, and you're like, yes, obviously, Amy Adams and John Mark, like, yes is the answer. But then you're like, oh, but the stuff that we've had for 18 months that we sort of like love and have rolled up our sleeves for has to now, take a back seat. So I feel two ways about it, but everything, both work. I mean,
Right.
it's
And
not a
that's the
bad thing.
risk, right?
That's a risk,
I mean,
yeah.
it's a huge risk because as you're going out there,
Yeah.
for a studio, especially an independent studio, you're in this really weird position because you have to explain in a way why do you need us? And so you want to put together a reason, but at the same time, you don't want to put together so much of a reason that you kind of blast that out other development, and it has to be at a certain level. So you're just trying to find your way, and hopefully you do.
And if you're getting that level of talent, it makes it much more appealing. Clearly, there are a lot of packages out there that just aren't quite as premium, and then it's a disadvantage. And when it comes in the door, packaged up like that already to us, and maybe you like one element of it, but that star is not exactly the right star for us, or that director won't break through for our brand. It does then hurt the project because we don't want a part of the package, and someone on the selling end either has to decide to cut bait or take it somewhere else.
Well, under normal circumstances, how much flexibility is there on a project when it comes to you in that respect? Like, do you get to go, I don't want, this person, come back to me with 75% of it and I'm there? Or do they say, okay, well, if you don't want it, someone's bound to take the other part?
It depends on the agent.
It depends on the agent.
You know what I mean? If you're like,
It depends on if they have a
like
sale.
this, then I don't like the writer, I don't like whatever. They'll be like, okay, we'll bring it back. Some are hungry to do that, and some are like, bye, going to Netflix, see ya. And you're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? But that's a real risk, and it's something we talk a lot about. Like, we sit in our meetings now, and if something comes in and there's something we don't like about it or whatever, like, are we okay if this goes to Netflix, Amazon, Hulu? Are we going to be sad if the billboard comes out on another network? And that's a real conversation. It's hard, but also, it's. I don't think we've ever dismantled a project that comes in, but we would. I mean, if we really, really wanted a piece of it, we would ask. But it all depends on the seller.
We've gotten in front of a couple of them. We know if an agent or a producer calls us and it's like, maybe this package is coming together. We've often said to producers, just we love that book, we love that title.
Yeah.
Just we'll buy that from you and let's package it up together. And it is actually much easier packaging it
It's
after
also
you've gotten a
fun.
sale. And
Isn't
it's
it fun? I like doing it too.
On the selling side, I make so many calls to buyers saying, is this a value add? Is this, and if you start to get the, maybe, then why are you making that deal? And you can do the homework ahead of time, but you're right, like so many of those very large packages have been created by the agencies. We definitely try to assess, we have a couple of specs that we're considering packaging now. Some of them are very small character dramas. How do you break through the clutter? How do you create, they're beautiful, beautiful scripts. How do you create how am I going to get it on your radar to pay attention to that? Well, you get a great director, or you get the star, but only if it's a meaningful one. It really has to be undeniable.
Well, I mean, it's obviously such a power play on every level. What do you guys think when you hear about, there's always a rumbling that agency X or Y is contemplating a studio arm, sort of taking it out of somebody else's hands, basically. Does that worry you, terrify you?
I'm shocked a few of them haven't already. There's money to be made, it feels like, and they do have a lot of the power. So it feels inevitable, but I guess we'll see. There's something stopping them.
I mean, they're going to probably start looking to international. I mean, if you look at IMG and kind of, their success with The Night Manager, it's how these things sell internationally. That's probably going to be their focus. So I don't think it's going to be everything that these guys do. It's going to actually be in our territory, a lot of it, that's where they're going to make their money. So I don't think it's going to totally take away the business, but it'll definitely influence it greatly.
Now, Ali, you work for a company that's relatively new in the TV space, obviously a great reputation in feature films. What is the role of finding these sort of brands or IP names that can make the splash, that can sort of make everyone go, okay, Annapurna TV buys ...
I think it's a combination. I mean, we're actively developing 35 projects right now, which is what? Good question. Which is really fun and really exciting and a lot of work. And it's a lot different on the feature side, where they have pretty much a one-to-one ratio. Everything they put into development, they plan on making. We're not a platform. We're not a network. We have to kind of take chances on big things and put a lot of money behind big things, big properties. And then we want to take chances on those new, unique, distinct voices that are, young novelists, young writer-performers, staff writers, and we're doing a lot of that too. So I think there's a balance. We optioned Maria Semple's new book, Today Will Be Different, and we got Julia Roberts attached and sold that to HBO. We just optioned a Philip Roth book, Plot Against America, for David Simon. We optioned, it's one of my favorite projects, the Rolling Stones article that came out about the Pamela Anderson, Tommy Lee sex tape scandal, and Seth Rogen and James Franco are attached. And so
Which of them is playing Pamela Anderson?
Seth is playing Pamela. No, so in that respect, we attached a writer. We're paying him to write. We're packaging that up and hopefully driving a commitment at some of these networks. But we don't always want to do that. I mean, I think partly too, HBO, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, whoever. They want to feel like they've been a part of the process. And we, for the Maria Semple, Julia Roberts show, for example, we didn't attach a director first. I think we definitely could have, but we wanted to do it in step with the network, with HBO, and have them be a part of the conversation. Who are you guys excited about? Who do you feel like is best for this project? And they've obviously had a lot of experience and success with the sort of limited series lately, and one director. Does that make sense? So I think it's a combination, and I think for us as a mini studio, there's a lot of projects where we're EPs on and producers, and then we're studio. We're planning on deficiting things. We're cash flowing. We're the studio on a Coen Brothers project that's shooting this summer for Netflix. So I think we're able to be flexible and nimble and whatever sort of suits the creative and suits the project. But oftentimes, if we sell to HBO, they don't want us to be the studio. You know what I mean? Unless something is totally undeniable, right? Like the sharp objects. So I think we just have to be flexible. And we do a combination and a wide range of things, working with the Coen Brothers for their first TV show, and then, baby writers, writer-performers. I mean, I don't give notes to the Coen Brothers, you know what I mean? So it's fun to roll up my sleeves and dig in on something that from a writer that's emerging.
Well, when you have something like the Julia Roberts project, is the IP even the selling point anymore, or is it Julia Roberts?
I think it's the IP, actually, and I think
that one specifically, the IP was a big deal.
Yeah,
We all read the book. And
That
then,
book is
It's
fantastic.
great. Yeah.
And Maria, she had written Where'd You Go, Bernadette, that Anna Pern on the feature side is doing with Richard Linklater and Cate Blanchett, and she didn't adapt that herself, and this was, Today Will Be Different was a book she wanted to adapt herself, so she wrote a script, and that was, to be honest, I mean, Julia Roberts is amazing, but that was her voice, her vision, this character she created, which is very, very much her in a lot of ways, was most exciting to me.
Now, Kathleen, obviously you guys have a tradition of strong miniseries projects, and that's a thing, but still, the money is always in ongoing drama. So when you have something that's from a book, close-ended, how do you know when it has 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons in it, or when you're just going to be satisfied, okay, Big Little Lies is just one season, that's what it is?
Or is it?
Or is it?
But that's actually a great example, because I think you don't know. We were like, okay, we went into this one season. Obviously, it had a huge response, and Leanne got very excited to whoever made the point about authors, like their book sales went through the roof, and she's very pleased about that. And so now she's like, well, maybe there's something to this TV game. And so you kind of don't know, and you see, I think even with ongoing series, when you always, look, I mean, yes, we want ongoing series. But sometimes the story, but we always defer to the creators in terms of what makes sense. And like when they end the show, almost always comes from them. And so I think the same with a book or IP. It's like, how many do you, the creator, see? And we'll take it from there. And then if, you know, when you produce a season and you get to the end of it and they're like, I think I could tell more story, we're very open to that. I think, you know, it's project specific.
I'll watch 10 seasons of Big Little Lies.
So
I will commit today to watch 10 seasons.
It was pretty fun, that one. I liked it.
But with something like that, where it's packaged, how do you decide what's the point with which we couldn't do a second season? You know, if Reese and Nicole say, sure, we can do it, but Shailene doesn't. If Mark Valley doesn't want to do a second season, is he essential? Or does it have to be all of them, et cetera? Does that make it harder to project?
Yes. I don't want to bring up True Detective season 2. But sometimes you need more elements than, you know, it all depends on what the story becomes. You know, if Leanne and David E. Kelly and Reese come in and they're like, we can tell the same story, but Nicole and Shailene aren't necessarily in it, that's not what's happening, but just as an example, we would still be like, okay, let's talk about that. You know, it really depends on what the story, the narrative is going to be, and how it can sustain and be supported by the pieces involved. I mean, I'm sure certainly people would be like, where's Nicole and where are they? But, you know, if it makes sense, hopefully you fill it in a different way.
But Sharp Objects, which does have a very finite ending in the book, that's being viewed as a multi-season.
Or does it? Just to steal your line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're like, if they have ideas for season 2, you're like, okay.
All right. Yeah, and they do, and it's actually it's organic. But that's why, you know, going back, that's why it was great to have Gillian, you know, involved, obviously with Marty, and kind of keeping it true to what it was, but different.
Okay, this is a big enough subject that I'm sure people have questions, so I want to make sure if anyone has questions about any of this, including Big Little Lies Season 2.
God, you're killing me. I stumble through the Game of Thrones one. I'm going to all the secrets you're asking me. I don't know.
Have one over there.
Am I screaming or am I blinking? Okay.
Looks like
So I'm an author without an agent or manager yet because I just said something fluke happened. Do you guys find, you know, no one usually speaks to me without an author or manager? Or is that, it says author, I mean, agent, manager, no. And then how do you take someone like that? I mean, I want to be the next Jeff Whitehall, so at you know, American or something. But that's the sort of my fancy. What do you do with something like that? Or how do you go? Or do you go searching organically as well? Or you just wait to be approached because that's just what happens?
I'll start the answer. Unfortunately, in this day and age, there's so much liability attached to unknown quantities. TV is such a writer-driven medium that it's always so exciting to find a new voice. So part of me loves to take every new author, you know, unsigned writer, but just because I have a company that I report to with tremendous potential liability, I can't. You know, there's always those waiver of liability. Okay, you can submit there, but it really becomes a very relationship-based submission process. That just knowing that there can be a conversation. If I read something, you know, Allie said she has 35 projects in development. I don't even know how many I have. I might have 60. Inevitably, I have a similar idea, and so it's really difficult to take in, you know, something from somebody who thinks that their version of Homeland is 100% original, and yet there's like 20 other versions in the marketplace right now. So I think that was part of the question you were asking.
Yeah, I heard that, and I totally get that part. But so that's why I was more manager or agent, or do you care? I just said that.
I think it doesn't make a difference between agent and manager as long as they have fantastic taste. You know, there are agents and managers that I will take their call because everything they've sent me is amazing. And then there are a few who I kind of put that at the bottom of my phone sheet because they've, you know, sent me 10 dogs. And, you know, you only have a limited bandwidth for what you can read.
other questions out there? Nope.
Good question. I'm wondering in terms of looking for content, obviously there's, you know, all the traditional kind of channels that you guys talk about. Podcasts now are a really strong way of telling stories, not just kind of true crime, although that's a big one, obviously, the serial, but like a lot of ways, a lot of comedy, stuff like that. So I'm wondering, do you guys look to podcasts for kind of finding talent in any ways? If you talk about what that process does or does not look like.
want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we look everywhere. I mean, there, we were In the Dark is a great podcast that I think is really something interesting. You're always listening to things and trying to figure out where's the new story and how can you find a new voice, certainly to expand upon. I mean, true crime has been very successful because of Serial, but I don't think it's necessarily only going to be that way. I think more and more those sources also for humor, for comedy, for new voices in that area. If you have a huge following, if your podcast is getting millions of listens, or I think it's important. Because then you go, okay, this person has a voice, and people who are going to follow that voice. So I think it's going to become something more and more.
And to take it a step further, we've actually got a digital branch where I think we have about 4 podcasts that are in development, mostly scripted narrative podcasts. And our intent with that is not only great storytelling for everybody's commutes, but also proof of concept. It's great IP to then, look at what happened with Homecoming, and we're developing a grounded sci-fi scripted podcast. We also, have pursued quite a few. Like there's Limetown got set up and is being developed, and Limetown also.
Yeah, and
S-Town.
is going around,
And
too.
so S-Town's an interesting one because it's a very specific character drama. You think it's one thing and it changes genre episode to episode. I'm so curious to see how that translates to television.
Or it could be film. I don't know I don't know if that landed yet, but
Yeah, does anyone know if that got set up anywhere?
I don't know.
I heard David Fincher was getting it, but I don't know.
Yeah, because I think the entire town put a bid in. Like, everyone was like, okay.
I don't know.
So, Alex and Peter talked about how they have like these huge IP treasure troves to plunder if they need to, get the next thing. Are you guys using like the film properties that as a jumping off point? Is that something that a library that you guys are building, or is that just completely separate from what you're doing?
It's definitely separate. We've talked about it, and not for anything specific. I think what we kind of more are looking and talking about is there a book, a property that can kind of be a film, a TV show, and we have an awesome gaming VR department. So is there something that is world building, is maybe sci-fi fantasy that can, the movie can be sort of the launching point, and then we carry it into series, and then there's this like really awesome, immersive, cinematic, atmospheric game that we can create. So I think we're constantly talking, we're sharing writers, we're sharing filmmakers, ideas, but it's more so in that space as opposed to adapting, although Sausage Party, the TV show, would be great. So it's more so that than looking at the things that they've already done, that they've done so well, and keeping those a little separate. That could change, though.
And one thing that's worth mentioning just for this general conversation is even though we have this huge library of content, by far our biggest hit so far has not been based on existing IP. It's our show Troll Hunters with Guillermo del Toro, which launched in December on Netflix. And that was driven by the power of the idea, the power of Guillermo and his passion for doing it. It also, I guess it achieved part of what we often want from a brand with some pre-awareness. It got Netflix invested at such a high level that they marketed it in a way they've never marketed any kids and family show before. So there's a lot of different ways to get passion going. At least in my corner of the business, in kids and family and in animation, we actually do take pitches from people who are unrepresented, writers, artists, all the time. We don't require the people, pretty much anyone who contacts us can get material looked at, a script read, someone on the team will do that. But, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that many of the biggest hits are still entirely original, and there's still opportunity there.
When a package comes to you, how do you establish, like, if it's going to be a based on, adapted by, like a one-to-one, like with Big Little Lies or something, there's like a change drastically from the end of the book to the end of the show. Like, if Jessica Jones's like Kilgrave was like a completely different character than from in the comics or something like that. Like, how do you kind of establish how far a post will adapt the show to?
I can't speak specifically to Jessica Jones, not having worked on that, but I think with our other properties at Marvel that we look at, it really is, and I think it's been set up here entirely up to the creator. We'll hear pitches before we agree to attach somebody to something, and if it's a direction we love, we hear from starting with episode 1 all the way to 10, basically. We want to hear what's happening in that series, what's your arc, and if they take it to someplace we didn't think of and we like it, then great. We certainly don't want you to just base it exactly on what you've seen in the books. So it's, in the end, it's really, it's inspired by, it's certainly based on the characters. There are a lot of folks who I think will get credit for that. The people who wrote the comics, even back to the creator, and the other people who worked on specific comics we use that have inspired specific storylines. So there's no one way to do it. It's sort of case by case. As far as what exact credit we have put, like at the front, inspired by, based on, that is typically left up to a team of legal experts who can, because each one means something completely different and probably means a different tier of participation. So we leave that to them, but try to include everybody who's had a hand in at least the story we're telling.
Alex, how is it different when you work on something like Brave New World, where obviously Aldous Huxley not so much alive anymore? What is the control or proprietary interest that the estate takes?
That's an interesting one because the property, the rights to the property were very aggressively pursued by the studio. So the studio has had the most interaction, and we pretty much defer to them to interface with the estate. So I can't speak to specifics, but clearly it's a fairly iconic property, and we handle very, very carefully. I can speak to that.
When there are times where we go back to we had an incident yesterday, Grant and I, on a property where we as the network actually went back to the source material. We were like, wait, this character, is this way and has this relationship in the books themselves. How can we bring that back and inform the TV show with that in mind? So it does kind of, sometimes things evolve and change, and sometimes it's really great to have that place to return to remember where the heart of the character is.
In those circumstances, who has final veto between Freeform and Marvel?
I think it's more of a collaboration, honestly, because
Freeform.
We both want we both want the same thing in the end, a good show. But I think there's never going to be a place where we're like, we think one thing, they think the other. I think there's ways to talk through everything.
And with almost everything, it's the creator, it's the showrunner, it's the writer.
Yeah.
That's the most important person, and that's the decider.
So I was just curious, how do you deal with previous IP when it comes to like historical characters, like tutors or anything diverse? How do you deal with that? Like not something if someone maybe just died last year, but real people existed hundreds of years ago.
We have a project in development based on the Freedom Riders story, and a lot of those people are still alive, and their families are still alive, and so it does get messy, and sometimes we just kind of take inspiration from. It's messy to go for real people often, and taking the general vibe of what was going on in a historical time period and some kind of themes and applying it to a fictional character will give you more freedom in the storytelling than often going after a real person will do.
Right, just to add to that, when you start to, because you don't, the worst thing to do is have like real people and also a fictional world, and so when you have to start creating narrative that didn't exist but they're real people, it has like could have like a really big effect, because it could influence their children's narrative, and those are real people. It could influence, people who worked with them, and so all of a sudden, and I think this is public, Masters of Sex had that problem, with their kids. The problem wasn't with the parents, the problem was with their kids. And so that was like a really interesting example. Movies don't have as much of a problem because it's finite, but things like TV shows, when you have to start really generating more story and that doesn't exist, or you don't know for sure if it existed, that's when it gets tricky.
Hi, my name's Amanda Ward. I'm a novelist here in Austin, and I'm curious about what qualities you're looking for in novels that tell you it would translate to a miniseries.
Who has recently bought a miniseries pitch? Anyone?
I'll take that. I think not only miniseries, but also ongoing series. If it's something that I am reading and I don't feel like it's work, and it's a page turner, then I'm in. That's the first step. But you want, I think with everything, has this story been told? Is this new territory to cover in television landscape? And I think that, for one thing that we're in development with is a unpublished Michael Crichton. Well, it's now published. It came out over Memorial Day. It's on the New York Times bestseller list, Dragon Teeth. We're developing as a mini-series. And if you read the book, it's got a very finite arc. It covers a period of history that is a true event, fascinating characters, but Michael Crichton found a really inventive way to access it for the audience. And I think those check a lot of boxes.
I think there was one right next, though.
Yeah, I have a question about just sourcing IP and maybe building on the podcast question. Maybe for Carolyn with a global studio kind of focus, are you looking outside of the U.S. for source material as well?
Yeah, we look a lot outside of the U.S. We have places, we have development hubs. So we have, in London, in Australia, in Toronto, and here. So we have people on the ground in all territories who are really working to help us find IP that we think can sell globally, which is cool. So we have, London Book Scouts. We're not just, we're obviously in New York too. We're looking at formats that are globally. And then we're also, which is really interesting, we announced this, that we're doing Gaddafi with Roberto Saviano and Nadav Shiraman. And he did Gomorrah out of Italy. And that is, and so that came from Italian partners that we work with. Palomar. So we're definite, and I think it'll translate here. Most certainly it's going to be in English. So we're definitely on the ground looking in all over the world to find things that we think can break through and have unique voices.
Anyone else have an answer for that one?
I mean, we definitely, the book fair circuit, so we go to Bologna, the largest international children's book fair is there every year. We go to London, we go to Frankfurt. We have people out scouting, and we find a tremendous amount of picture books and other material at the international festivals, and a lot of it is not originally English language. So it really, we're sourcing, from all over the world as well.
Let's see.
Kind of a question for Grant and for Alex. Grant, you were mentioning, like networks and studios are, risk averse, and so IP is incredibly important. And then Alex, there was something I was turning over in my mind. You said like there are a couple of dramas that you feel like you can't. It's harder because they're not based on IP necessarily, so they're harder to set up. For independent financing companies that are not within networks or studios, besides paying for development or doing deficit financing, do you see kind of cracks in the structure that a company like mine could take advantage of to be able to be part of like the who's laughing?
No, I'm curious on this.
I'm just wondering, like, so many times I hear the answer that outside money from, that doesn't generate from networks or studios is irrelevant because you have.
Who says that?
Well, maybe we should talk after this. But I just wanted to know generally what your ideas were in terms of outside financing getting involved in television.
Great question. I think that step one is to talk to the major agencies. They love to figure out what to do with people's money, and they're good at it for the most part.
I used to be an agent at CAA, so.
There you go.
Yeah.
You've got a leg up. Yeah. Talk to them. They can put you in touch with the producers who are looking for that, who also have the power, the clout to take stuff out, but maybe don't have the infrastructure or the backing, and that could grow to something. But that would be exactly where I'd start. Would be CAA, WME, UTA, all the big ones.
Yeah, bringing money to the table is, and especially now in this era of peak TV, and no matter who's backing you, money's always tight because we just need a lot of volume. Bringing money to the table is huge, and I bet we could find you some people.
And just as a last question for each of you, give me a recent IP-related property that premiered on television where you're like, man, that was my dream. Wish I could have done that one.
I'll take Handmaid's Tale. Obsessed.
Yeah.
Obsessed. That's why I jumped in first, because I think everybody has watched it.
Mine isn't on yet, but it's Animaniacs. So that was at the very top of titles that I would have, as an animation guy, would have loved to have been involved with. So we'll talk about what's next.
I'm watching The Sun on AMC. I love that book. Thought it was brilliant. I've liked where they've taken the show. I'm also partial. I just love watching anything sort of cowboy western related. It's been a while since they've done a good version of that. I think this is sort of a nice crossover between the two. That is fun. I think they're doing another season, which will be fun.
I'm gonna say OJ.
I'm going with Big Little Lies. So it was amazing.
This is sort of a weird one, but Fleabag was based on Phoebe Waller-Bridge's play, and I'm obsessed with her and that show.
Is Walking Dead too old? Is that too old?
Not at all. Well, thank you all very much for chatting today, and thank you all for coming.